So we're going to talk about Adam and Eve in regards to two different things. Now, in the body, we can see that the colostrum produces that fluid that's differentiated by the pineal and pituitary gland, and it goes all the way down through the nervous system and ends up manifesting the oils at the bottom. Now, if we compare this to an outside thing, because that happens inside biochemically, we can see that colostrum represents like the Father, the unified source. And when that colostrum dispenses that oil and it's differentiated into the pineal and pituitary gland, it's the exact same thing that happens to the soul when it descends and is split into two. And Thomas H. Burgoyne discusses how when our souls descend, we actually manifest our separate selves completely, and the physical representation manifestation is an actual representation of that. So that means if you're born a male, you actually have your spiritual Eve that was split from you. And through the process of descending into the material realm, living out your experiences throughout your relationships, whether you've had, all of your relationships with you, if you're, with another woman or with another man, have helped this alchemical process come together. So in the same way, the fluids are differentiated by the pineal and pituitary gland, descend into the bottom of the spine, and are lifted back up to be reunited. In the same way, on a macrocosmic scale, the soul is split into two as it descends into masculine and female. And here we are. So when we're here, we have a little bit of apart from that other source. So we're going to be discussing various things in regards to this and how the twin flame mysteries relate to what Thomas H. Burgoyne was teaching, and we're going to relate it anagogically, macrocosmically, and biochemically. So Adam and Eve is the deity, which is the unity, which has both sexes within it, masculine and feminine. We would call it like Kether. When Kether manifests its dual aspect, love and wisdom are the two rays. Like love and wisdom. So love is that feminine, nurturing, motherly ability. The most that we get from that is like our mother's love. Like we can see that in the physical realm from like the love. If we had like a normal relationship with our mother, that love that we've had and that nurturing is the manifestation of that ray of love. And then the wisdom ray is represented by the masculine energy. That's like the Father. So these two principles are what regulate and manifest this material realm. And this is what we call the Elohim that guides the splitting of the sexes of humanity. Because if we go into the Western mysteries, we were told love and wisdom. Love is that feminine, nurturing, motherly ability. The most that we get from that is like our mother's love. Like we can see that in the physical realm from like the love. If we had like a normal relationship with our mother, that love that we've had and that nurturing is the manifestation of that ray of love. And then the wisdom ray is represented by the masculine energy. That's like the Father. So these two principles are what regulate and manifest this material realm. And this is what we call the Elohim that guides the splitting of the sexes of humanity. Because if we go into the Western mysteries, we were told that humans used to be what we call like in our first phase of crystallization into the material realm, both like Elohimic beings. That means beings of both natures. And then the split occurs gradually. And the split is the goal. Like we don't want to, it's part of the plan. Like we didn't want to be that. We wanted to split. We wanted to have our Eve or our Adam separate for us so that we could have an interaction with them here on this physical plane. So this split is actually eternal. Now, a lot of the theosophical schools say that, there is no such thing as gender, and that, a lot of the esoteric Buddhist schools say that when you're in this realm, like you might be a guy this time and a girl tomorrow, and it says that the soul has no gender. But if we go into the true Hermetic studies that Thomas H. Burgoyne taught us, he explains that this split is eternal. This co-manifestation is the regulative principle and how life works. And that's why, we should understand that even when we're outside of the human body, there's going to be gender. Sexual activity is not just in this physical plane. There's subtle actual realities of the sexual relationships between man and woman in the higher realms of existence that are more transcendental. So it's not something that we leave behind. And when you're taught that by a school, like if you're taught in a school that you're supposed to give up your gender and that your soul doesn't have a specific identity, this is just not how nature works. Of course you do. And that is co-eternal. So Adam represents the spirit mind, Eve, of course, like the soul and inner emotions. Now in the Adam and Eve story, Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. This is where like the first manifestation of human individualized consciousness existed, except it exists in a state of self-absorbed innocence and unifiedness, which means there's like a dream world that nothing happens out of the ordinary. There could be nothing that happens that causes any dismay. So what happens then is that desire of the soul desires to have knowledge. And as soon as Eve, that soul part that is the inner emotions and desire for material incarnation, is inclined to bite the Taurus field, it bites it, and physical incarnation is the effect. So that means your soul decided to desire to eat that apple, to descend into the physical realm, to experience an actual discriminatory consciousness. That's why every day I can decide like 100% what I'm going to do today. Of course, we're like triggered by subconscious behaviors and automatic nature. But in this world, we have a lot of discrimination. In the dream world, it's hard to have discrimination. Things just kind of go like a roller coaster. You have to gain that discrimination here because in Eden, it's more of an ethereal, subtle realm where, anything can really happen. So here on the physical plane, Adam being the mind, the serpent represents the desires and the inner soul and emotions, what goes after the apple. So whenever the desire energy or the procretic energy comes up to your mind and your inner emotions has a feeling or an affinity towards like a sensual gratification or like a taking action, that emotion goes and upstairs to tempt Adam, which is the mind. Now, this is when your mind says, okay, you have an urge, you're like, I want to do something. And that urge comes because the serpent tempted Eve. Eve is the soul and the emotions. Then those emotions intrigue the mind. Now, this is where the mind can decide to either do or do not. That's why we call the lecture the science of non-action, because with the power of Adam and the spirit mind, you can always say, I am not going to go for what Eve desires. So in Eve, the solar emotions always gets inflamed with the desire. It tempts the brain, and Adam then again regurgitates and does the action. Once Adam says, okay, Eve, I will do this, and follows through with the emotions, Adam bites the apple, which means your mind's infected with that addiction now. So for example, if Eve tempts you to smoke a cigarette, and then your mind tells you, you know what, Eve, you might want a cigarette right now to fulfill that stimulation, but I'm going to go ahead and decline that. That's Adam not eating the apple. So, but usually humanity, when Eve tempts us, like we're using cigarette just for an example, this goes for all desires. Now, Eve tempts you, and the mind will say, oh yes, I will have that. And as soon as you eat it, you create the habit pattern. So of course we can relate this to a very sexual connotation of Adam being the brain, Eve being the sexual organs, and the serpent being the desire for procreation. Every time that serpent tempts us, it goes up, our emotions are inflamed, and then our mind is tempted. And as soon as the mind says, yep, I want a taste of that, we're hit into that cycle. We feel a sense of shame or depleteness. We feel like we've gone a little bit outside of natural law. We've stepped outside of the flow of the sine wave. And because of that, we're now thrust in a sense of shame and guilt. Like every time, like, some people have differently. Like if you have a gambling addiction and Eve tempts you, like, I want to go blow all this money and gamble. And then Adam says, okay, let's do it. And then you do that. As soon as you're done, you're going to feel a sense of emptiness. That void is when Elohim says, get out of the garden. You're cast out. And that's on a psychological level. So we've talked about the biochemistry, how The brain relates to the seed and the split, how the soul descends from Kether, the highest plateau, and splits, and then it descends into Malkuth, just like the spinal column, and then it rises back up, reunited. Now, what's very interesting is Manly P. Hall said this process, there's two schools of thought. There's one school of thought that says there's a one and only soulmate, that you have a soulmate out there, that you're going to find her. And if you're not with her or him yet, you're going to be reincarnated until the great reunion happens and that occurs. So some people are like, oh crap, I don't have a soulmate, or I'm not with a partner, or I've had a lot of partners and breakups and now I don't know who is who. Well, the truth is there's two schools of thought. And Manly P. Hall said another one is that maybe it's not necessarily that individual one, but all of those relationships that you've had have contributed to this regeneration of the two split of the soul and the reconciliation of that. So it's very possible that your previous relationships leading up to your main one, or if you're single, don't count yourself out, because those have alchemicalized your soul and are preparing the chamber for that ascent up. Just like the spine, when the fluids descend from the Eden Pingala to the bottom, there's a mixing that occurs and it rises back up anew. So this is a process in nature that is inclined to happen. The electromagnetic field is always enticing us to do these things, to overcome desires and to transmute them. So Adam Kadmon, Adam, the first being, the first chapter of Genesis is very beautiful because it says God created all of these things and they were good, and God created man and he was good. And then the second chapter goes into God created Adam and Eve from the dust of the earth, and they ate the apple, and then they were thrown out of the garden. So there's two chapters, and the first one is like a perfect summary of like a perfected book. The first chapter represents it as a whole, as Adam Kadmon, this blueprint soul, the archetypal man that's born in the heavens, the 12 zodiac. But if we use our imagination and pierce into the veils, we would see that there must be a perfect blueprint human being that is the blueprint that we've all come from, miniatures. So by having knowledge of this unified being and not worshiping it, but recognizing that you come from like a higher source, something that is already perfected and that we all split from. And from the monad, the dual principles of positive and negative manifest, so that we can have this experience of male and female, good and evil, hot and cold. From the two spirit sparks, our monads are creating the image of the first emanation. So that's why Kether at the top of the tree of life has both of those manifestations. It has male and female. And then when it splits into Chokmon Bana, we have wisdom and love. So we also have this image within us. We have an inner father and an inner mother. And these inner father and mother are always trying to develop us. The inner mother is what helps expand the four elements and allows us to have an experience, to experience a warm blanket or to fill the material realm. And then the inner father is the mind, the perceptive faculty, the will. So Adam and Eve split eternally and manifest as male and female in human form. And since this physical expression is an effect of the spiritual, we can see that gender exists eternally and exists before material incarnation. So it's not that you were just this genderless soul that manifested to either a boy or a girl. It's just that your soul was this and it manifested as that, according to Thomas H. Burgoyne. So when we're expelled from the garden, man and woman become dense and manifest as physical beings. This is why the Vedantists never needed like a creation, like when did the creation happen? What date did Earth was formed? To them, that's irrelevant because we understand that this Earth is just a dense form of what's already there in the astral plane. Just like mist humidifies, becomes water and becomes an ice cube, this realm is the precipitation of the spiritual realm condensed and made manifest. It is a shadow and physical representation of cosmic beings, forces that are already there. That's why when this realm gets subtle, and invisible beings can manifest materially that our materialized can't see. Our physical brains and eyes work as like a filter between these two realms. So in this realm, we are always searching to be reunited with our other half. This is why as soon as we are born, our hormones kick in when we're teenagers, and as soon as our receptive compass is already looking for our soulmate, we want to experience the knowledge of God. and that is through the knowledge of sex. And through sex, we become innocent and pure, or we become demonic and diabolical. This is the system of the knowledge of good and evil. The two trees are in the systems of the body. See, the tree of good and knowledge of evil is the system that runs down towards the sexual organs, and the tree of life rises up into the brain. And when we choose to sublimate that energy, it's always feeding the tree of life and regenerating the spiritual currents. So, of course, the serpent represents sense consciousness, desire of sensation. The sine wave tempts us into the pole opposite of spirit, which is matter. So this is very interesting because this is basically saying that matter is not separate from spirit. It's the polar opposite of spirit. It's the manifestation. It's spirit made flesh. So when man falls into the dense levels of creation in order to find its way back to the source, the knowledge of duality, it has to find its companion. And throughout our life, the Creator gives us multiple opportunities to do this work. So Adam and Eve eat the apple. The apple's a Taurus field. Taurus represents that duality that lets us have the experience that we have right now in this room. So the soul's descent into the material realm is due to the attraction the soul or Eve has for that. See, the soul desires knowledge of self, so it wants to be part of its dualistic of negative matter. And then, of course, Adam has to be the mind that's separated from it and is able to perceive it objectively.